In this forecast, I'm going to be showing you a very intriguing pattern change which is about to arrive across Europe and the United States. These big pattern changes look more and more likely to bring much colder air for millions of people, with even some heavy snowfall becoming increasingly likely. So whether you're watching from Europe or the United States, I've got you covered in this video. With that said, let's get started with Chapter 1. We're going to start this analysis on January 5th, which is just before we see that pattern change begin. You're going to notice a few things, one of which is a lot of rain and mountain snow across Iberia, beginning to move into the Mediterranean, with another low pressure area over the North Sea bringing some lighter snowfall to southern Scandinavia. Going into January 6th, we're going to see some improvements regarding all that precipitation and unsettled weather across Western Europe, with all these low pressures weakening and dissipating, except for one over the Mediterranean Sea. By January 7th, we're going to see the storm continue to organize as it moves over Italy, bringing widespread rainfall and strong winds. Now, something interesting you're probably noticing by now is some of that blue showing up for the United Kingdom. This is a new trend that the GFS model has started showing today, so I wouldn't hold my breath for this quite yet, but if we can get some moisture to linger with these decaying low pressure areas, we just might see a mini beast from the east develop for parts of the British Isles and even Ireland between January 7th and the 8th. Now, focusing further south around this time, a secondary low pressure area may develop over the Balkan countries, which could bring a more organized swath of snow to Eastern Europe into Russia as we go into January 8th. Between the 8th and the 9th, high pressure over Scandinavia is going to continue expanding, so we're going to see that storm over the Mediterranean basically get trapped, with leftover rain and snow over the British Isles and Ireland being pushed out to sea. For those who have been waiting for a drier pattern, it looks like we're finally going to see that really take hold by this time. As we push this forward into January 10th and beyond, we continue to see that cutoff low bringing rain to far southern areas of Europe, with some activity showing up over Iberia as well. Between the 10th and the 13th, we will probably see more of the same, but take a look at the system that drops southward from the North Sea, potentially bringing a reinforcing wave of cold air and even snowfall. I wouldn't take this too seriously just yet, since lots of things have been changing, especially this far out, but I definitely would recommend watching January 10th and beyond for another interesting weather event associated with this big change in the pattern. Now, as a quick review of what I just showed you, I wanted to really put into perspective this change in the pattern. Starting off with precipitation between January 1st and the 8th, we can see how Western, Central, and Eastern Europe will be taking the brunt of these constant Atlantic storms, while northern and southern areas will be generally drier. Now we're going to compare this to January 8th through the 15th and look at how much it changes. With the help of a frigid anticyclone likely to take over northern Europe, we're going to see these storms get completely blocked from the west. The lack of Atlantic storms also means that warm air coming with them will be absent, so this will allow for cold easterlies to dominate. Then parts of southeastern Europe and parts of Iberia look to receive wetter conditions as slow-moving storms get trapped by the high pressure dominating further north. This will bring much needed drought relief for some areas, especially across southern Europe. For temperatures between January 1st through the 8th, much of Europe is well above average except for the Baltic and Nordic countries into Russia, where we are seeing an extreme cold snap. Now compare that to January 8th through the 15th, and just as we would expect, we see much colder air spreading all across the European continent. In conclusion, I have three main takeaway points for you to remember. Firstly, widespread precipitation will continue through January 6th before high pressure begins taking over the northern half of Europe. Secondly, the high pressure will expand and strengthen between January 7th and the 10th, causing the northern half of Europe to turn much drier and colder, with the south turning wetter. Lastly, models are hinting towards a storm sometime after January 10th, which could possibly be our next chance for a widespread snowfall event, but there's still lots of disagreement among the models and therefore big uncertainty, so we're not going to talk about that in more detail in this video. For now, the United States is also expecting some big shifts in the pattern, so that's what we'll be discussing momentarily. Please enjoy Chapter 2 of today's video. Storm number 1, the first and weakest system, is going to begin later today as a mass of rain and storms over Texas. Between Wednesday and Thursday, we're going to see it track across the Gulf states and southeast with just some steady rainfall and maybe some rumbles of thunder. That system will quickly get out of the way just in time for a second and perhaps more significant storm heading into the west. We're going to see widespread rainfall and mountain snow as it moves in, and by January 5th, it will be moving away from the Four Corner states and shifting into the southern plains. Additional rainfall is likely, with snow expected in parts of Kansas and Nebraska. By January 6th, we're going to see heavy rain and storms moving across the Gulf states with this system before something interesting happens. Weather models have been in pretty good agreement in this storm reaching colder air across the Ohio Valley and mid-Atlantic, potentially causing a significant snowstorm, and going into the 7th, we see this possibly moving into the northeast. That will continue into the 8th before moving over the open ocean later that day. That's already 2 systems in a relatively short period of time, but if you think it's time for a break, unfortunately that was just the appetizer. Zooming back out and looking west, what you're seeing is the 3rd and potentially most significant storm so far. When storm number 2 exits, the new system is already moving into the southern plains, and this specific model shows it strengthening very rapidly going into January 9th, causing intense winds and widespread precipitation sprawling across a big part of the country. On the back end, we see a possible snowstorm developing, with the southeast seeing extremely heavy rainfall. On January 10th, this system could be over the Ohio Valley before shifting into Canada, and by the 11th, we could see conditions improving. One thing I wanted to briefly point out is the fact that this system is still far out and lots of things can still change, and even still with all this uncertainty, the Storm Prediction Center has pulled the trigger and issued a Day 7 slight risk. I'm going to be completely honest when I say this, but quite frankly, slight risks this far in advance are very rare, and they're only issued when the Storm Prediction Center has a high confidence in something very concerning coming up. So if you're currently included in the slight risk zone, please pay very close attention to this situation in the coming week. Moving on with the video, it's important to note that this storm looks to be the main culprit for the first significant wave of widespread cold air getting into the US this month. This outlook covers January 7th into the 11th. Much colder than normal air is likely across the western United States, while the east remains generally warmer than normal. For precipitation, just take a look at how much of the country is under the green shade. This indicates a chance of above normal precipitation, with darker colors meaning higher probabilities. This right here is the overall weather hazards outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, and we have 2 separate regions outlined in pink due to the chance of heavy snow between January 9th through the 11th. Then much of the East Coast is outlined in green due to the risk of heavy rainfall. Now for the snowfall hazard map, we can see that those pink shades represent a moderate risk of heavy snow, but look at how many other regions are at risk for heavy snow as well. Northeastern Oklahoma up into the Great Lakes and the interior Northeast are all at risk for heavy snowfall in this time frame, and then the same goes for the Intermountain West and the Cascade Mountain Range. We even have a slight risk of high winds extending from the southern plains up into the Ohio Valley and East Coast for January 9th into the 12th, and this is going to be associated with that major storm system that's becoming increasingly likely. So now to conclude Chapter 2, here's a quick review. Storm number 1 moves through the southern US with rain and maybe a few rumbles of thunder between January 2nd and the 4th. Storm number 2 will be more significant, spreading rain and mountain snow all the way from the west coast to the east coast, and then this one needs to be watched for a chance of heavy snowfall across the Ohio Valley, mid-Atlantic, and southern New England between the 6th and the 8th. Lastly, storm number 3 could be the most intense, widespread, and potentially dangerous storm between January 8th and the 12th. Very interesting weather is coming very soon across Europe and the United States, so make sure you stay tuned for more information. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.